Hi, this is Chuck Stull, looking at some alternate theories about the economics of unions. The simplest and perhaps most obvious is to consider unions as a cartel, right? Essentially trying to act together to restrict output and increase wages. So essentially, this is the same graph we've looked at with monopolies. The only difference here is that the supply is coming from the workers, the demand is coming from the employers, and in this case, the workers are restricting the supply of labor in order to increase wages. So the price of labor goes up, quantity of labor goes down. And of course, that also means that we have some people who might have worked in this sector, right, that is now unionized, are now going to be shifted out to non-union jobs, which should decrease wages in those other sectors. So a fairly straightforward monopoly-like story. But let me look at a couple alternatives. A second is to consider unions as a response to monopsony. Monopsony would be if there's buying power on the part of the employer, and that would cause wages to be below the optimal or competitive level. And the unions then could offset that and try and push us back towards a more socially desirable wage and quantity of workers. So let me walk through this model. I'm going to do a pure monopsony as opposed to trying to do oligopsony where we're sharing the buying power amongst workers. So if this is our labor market and we are the only employer in town, um, we have a demand for labor. So that's our demand as the purchaser of labor, and it's really based on the marginal benefits we get from from hiring workers, which really has to do with how productive they are. So we could look at that as the marginal revenue product if we wanted to be very technical. And then we have the supply of labor, the people who are willing to work for us. And you can see in order to hire more workers, we would need to pay higher wages. And this is something that we can take advantage of if we are the monopoly buyer or the monopsonist. So rather than go to the intersection of the supply curve and demand curve, which will be socially optimal, if we hire a smaller number of workers, the price we pay, right? So we move down the supply curve, the price we pay for all of our workers drops, right? And we can continue to push it down and down and down. Um, but of course, we are giving up some of the benefits of having those workers, the production that they would make. So in order to optimize, we could create and add to this graph another curve which shows the marginal cost of hiring an additional worker. And this is going to be a line that is above the supply curve and steeper. So the marginal cost is higher than the supply curve because as we hire a new worker, it pushes the wages up for everyone else as we move to the right along the supply curve. And so now what we want to do is figure out what is um, our best operating position. How low can we profitably push wages? And we can do that by looking at marginal costs and marginal benefits or marginal revenue product, or so the demand for labor. Where does it intersect the marginal cost curve? And we can use that to find our quantity, as shown here. So we look at the intersection of marginal cost and demand. That will be our optimal quantity of labor if we are a monopsonist, and then we are going to pay the wage needed to attract that many workers, which is that monopsonist wage, and you can see it's substantially below what a competitive wage would be. If this model is accurate, then what unions are trying to do is offset the monopsony power and push wages and quantity of workers up and become more socially efficient, looking more competitive. The third reason why we might have labor unions has to do with transactions cost. It may be more efficient for a firm to bargain once for all workers than to bargain individually with every worker, particularly if we didn't have power on, on the side of the employer. So there may be some savings just in terms of negotiating um, any of the labor contracts. A fourth theory, um, looking at unions and union outcomes, would be to focus on productivity. Unions create high wages and benefits, which can attract better workers and gives them incentives to improve their work. And um, if they are happier workers, ones who know that this is the best job they can get, they are going to do everything they can to be more productive. And again, this would be a fourth theory of how unions affect um, the economics of a business. Thank you for listening. This has been Chuck Stull talking a little bit about some economic theories related to labor unions.